interested in vampires, and my latest book, Vampire Resurrection, helps me feel that I'm somewhat qualified to talk about this. And as we get into it, I would like to invite callers to share any ideas or thoughts or experiences they might have had with vampires. They can call in on 724-438-4593 or 866-590-9627. I thought that I would begin to give people a taste, as it were, of vampires by reading some excerpts from my book. Ben Chesson would have done anything to pledge Nu Sigma Tau, anything. On the long walk through this lonely pineland on the deserted section of the island, he was acutely aware of the remoteness of his surroundings. On this clear night, with only the light of the full moon to lead their path, 2 frat brothers led him to his initiation. The cave had been well hidden. It was apparent that whoever had cleared the passage had spent a lot of time and effort doing so. Huge piles of stones, twigs, and debris were stacked on either side of the entrance, which was now covered by only a few tree branches. Pulling aside several of these branches, the 2 frat brothers, Dave and Brad, cleared the way to the cave's opening. It was musty but dry inside. Ben was grateful that the cave didn't seem to leak. He had seen his share of caves. His parents had taken the family to Luray Caverns, and he was familiar with the nature of underground passages. Somewhere, he guessed, there was a water source. "Well, here you go, Chesson. Here's your flashlight and 2 extra batteries to boot." "Extra batteries? Are you kidding, Brad? When I was initiated, I didn't get anything extra." "You're so soft." "Come on, Dave, it's dark in here. I don't like giving anybody in the dark." Yeah, said Dave as he slapped Brad on the back. "Let's clear out. After all, Ben has to spend the night in here alone. No sense taking up his time, and besides, we've got better things to do." "Right. Good luck, Ben. See you tomorrow." "Unless the ghosts get you first," added Dave. Ben stood motionless in the cave, trying to adjust his eyes to the darkness. After a few moments, he turned on the flashlight to guide his way through the cave. His earlier perception about the cave being dry was corrected as he lost his footing and slipped on the damp floor. The slippery substance was a cross between slime and something of a more solid yet indefinable consistency. His balance gone, he fell backwards against the slimy back wall and dropped the flashlight and extra batteries. He heard a grinding sound, and he began to roll backwards down a small opening in the wall. The clanking of his flashlight echoed as he fell. He careened for what seemed to be 5 minutes. Was this a secret passage? Was this for real? He briefly thought about his mother and how worried she would be if she knew what he was doing. He swallowed hard. He was in college now. He was an only child, and his parents had been overprotective. Now it was time to stand on his own, now that he was away from home. He resolved to take this experience as a man, even if it meant summoning up courage he never knew he had. So rather than panicking and wishing he were safe in his room back at the dorm, he took a deep breath to calm himself after his unwitting descent before feeling the area on the floor around him. He reached above, and finding no apparent ceiling directly aloft, he breathed a sigh of relief and carefully stood up. He tended toward claustrophobia, and knowing there was air above him, soothed his shakiness. His left shoulder met with the right angle of a wall. His right shoulder was free. He crouched again, this time fumbling for the flashlight. Nothing. The adrenaline was again pumping through him. In an attempt to slow down his racing heart, he gulped in the dank air and swallowed hard. He denied himself the luxury of panic, even though he feared he was in a tight space with no immediate exit. He would talk himself out of his anxiety and move ahead. No less was expected of a real man, he thought. Hands outstretched before him, like the sight-impaired victim he had become, he staggered forward. The immediate downward slope of the floor sent him reeling once again, and once more he fell. This time, though, he stood up immediately and resumed his search for a way out. The strange sounds he heard in the distance he quickly filtered out, so intent had he become on his trek. The unevenness of the area beneath his feet continued to thwart his speedy progress, yet he had also conquered some trepidation of the changing levels. Just knowing it would change and could throw him off balance was sufficient to assuage his paranoia. Being aware of what he had to cope with was 100 times better than the unknown. After making peace with his environment, at least as much as was humanly possible, he cautiously forged ahead. The floor tilted downward again, and as he was jerked off balance, his foot met with an object. Was it metal? He bent over and kneeled on the ground, feeling the area with his hands. The flashlight. This was a good sign. He reached down and turned it on. He was rewarded with a dim flickering of light, a result of the used-up batteries. His heart pounded heavily in his chest. He managed another deep breath and felt reassured that he would be all right. Of course, that meant prudently using the flashlight. He could not afford to squander its use on every turn he took. He calmed down. His heart returned to normal. He tried to remember that this had all been staged. Most fraternities went all out to make everything seem as real and scary as possible. All part of the initiation to frighten him, he supposed. He knelt down again and felt around his feet for the extra batteries. No luck. He resumed his search for a way out, groping this time against the walls of the cave. He thought by doing this he might avoid tripping over any objects or sliding down another decline. His progress was slow, and with the light extinguished, his senses were on high alert as his hand felt the cracks, crevices, and holes in the wall. Every now and then he sensed, more than felt, something crawling over his hands. It creeped him out. He had no concept of time, and he did not wear a watch, so he was unaware of the lateness of the hour. He assumed that after a reasonable length of time the brothers would return for him. It was just a matter of being able to wait it out. To satisfy his concern and to relieve his anxiety, every few seconds he would flick on the flashlight to assure himself he was headed in the right direction. His heart lightened as he saw an arched passageway that seemed to lead into a room. He turned off the light and moved toward it. He had only gone 4 or 5 steps when he stumbled into something hard. He turned on the light. It was an old wooden crate. From what he could tell, it was rotting. The precious flashlight was now flickering, offering a trickle of light where once a beam shone. He would have to turn it off or risk being without it the entire night. He decided to forego the light. His hands and fingers became his eyes. In this way he detected some type of raised carving on the top of the large crate, as well as a cold, hard object. He wasted no time in exploring its dimensions. His fingers ran over the cold metal object that ran in 2 directions, intersecting midway. It was a cross. His nerves began to fray. He did not like being alone down there, but he would not let any of the frat brothers in on his dread. Instead of unraveling, he forced a chuckle. Oh boy, a vampire, and he's probably got a stake in his heart. Okay, guys, I'll give you a real show. Now, where's the video camera? He turned on the light and shone it around the immediate area of the cave, but could not see any hanging objects or devices that resembled a camera. He switched off the light. I know you're getting this all down on tape, so I'll try to give you a real good performance. I know you want to see me pee my pants here, but frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. But I will give the fright part a good try. Positioning himself around the crate, he continued talking to the invisible camera. He was determined to pledge Nu Sigma Tau. He knew he was being tested, and he gave it his all. The need for peer approval struggled with Ben's innate fear of the unknown. So, what do we have here, he said. Let's open the lid. Are you getting this, guys? With a shaking hand, he pushed on the button of the flashlight. At the same time, he tried opening the casket. The rotted wood splintered apart in his hand. Wow, this is really old. Good special effects. He gasped at the sight before him. He had anticipated the fraternity brothers had planted someone to lie in the casket, but what he now was straining to see by the dimming flashlight looked almost mummified. The corpse was draped in what looked like a shroud. Protruding from the chest cavity was a stake. He leaned closer to get a better look and was caught off guard by the sounds of something flying very close by. The rushing air sped past his left ear, making a whooshing sound. He instinctively ducked. The beating of his heart accelerated to its former fast pace. Fear was again taking hold. The movement and sound caught him off guard. He deliberately focused on the contents of the crate in an attempt to divert his apprehension. The figure appeared to be a skillfully created plaster of Paris corpse. As though to assure himself of the fact, he deftly poked at the left hand, which was gripping part of the stick. The corpse didn't budge. He felt better. The light was now dimming. He hammered the flashlight against his knee, hoping to extract some unused cells in the batteries. His throat constricted. He began to sweat profusely. His heart began hammering in his chest as he again rode this roller coaster of emotions. He felt nauseated. But Ben was a fighter. He was determined to convince himself that this was all part of an elaborate charade. Rather than give in to fear, he acted by grasping the stick which protruded from the body. It came out rather easily, but as he tugged it, the jagged stick pierced his finger. Ouch! Damn it, I'm bleeding! Again he heard and felt something passing close by. As he felt for a handkerchief in his pocket, the bleeding cut dripped onto the corpse. At that moment he felt another rush of wind past his face. Something ever so lightly brushed his cheek. He screamed. Again he heard the sound of something flying around him. He felt he had lost all hope and quickly prayed someone would find him. The source of the sound instantly dawned on him, and he screamed again. Oh, God, bats! His frat brothers had teased him about the disgusting ways bats might attach themselves to a human scalp. He had assumed the stories were intended to frighten the pledges, and he scoffed at the tactic. Now, with the flying rodents invading his space, he wasn't so sure. The noise grew in its intensity as though one night creature had instantly multiplied into 100, which were now swarming above his head, flapping and squeaking. Some clung to his hair, burrowing into his scalp, and he screamed. "Get them off! Off!" he yelled in the empty cavern. As their leathery wings flapped above him, he could feel the rush of wind they created within the cave. He wildly kicked his arms and legs in an effort to remove the creatures from his body. It did no good. He could almost feel the moist sucking of the bats as they attached themselves to his body. In a mindless frenzy, he tried to brush them away. Flailing his hands at the creatures, he frantically sought to escape their path. He clicked on the flashlight, to no avail. And then, in the darkness, he tripped over a foot. He fell to the cave floor covered with bats. At first he felt the stinging sensation all over his body. Then he was overcome with an overwhelming, sweet sense of tranquility. The blackness before him was being veiled in a curtain of rich scarlet warmth. He was being bathed, no, caressed into it, and he was enraptured by the experience. He felt no fear, no apprehension. He ceased to struggle. He acquiesced to his captors. It was the last thing Ben remembered before oblivion overtook him. I think we'll leave it for there for now, but I think an interesting fact to note is there are so many different myths surrounding the origin of vampires. And, for example, everyone believes that vampires originated in Transylvania and with the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Actually, that's not true. The concept of a living, dead, blood-drinking entity actually dates back centuries ago and occurs in almost every culture around the world. Their variety is almost endless, from red-eyed monsters with green or pink hair in China to the Greek Lamia, which has the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a winged serpent. From vampire foxes in Japan to heads with trailing entrails in Malaysia. There are all kinds of vampires. Actually, some of the precursors to the vampire as we know it is the chupacabra, which was a blood-sucking alien creature that feasts mostly on other animals. And that's kind of another vampire-like myth. which originated in the hills of South America and still exists today. Going even further back, the myth of the Fury, or a woman that sucks the life from a sleeping victim, dates all the way back to Greek times. And it was believed that such creatures would suck the souls through the mouths of their victims and send them to an agony-filled torment in Hades. So there are many, many different kinds of forms of vampire myths. The whole idea of drinking blood to be immortal is not really a foreign one to the human mind. Indians and Christians have all had a part of this in this conception of the idea. The concept of drinking blood of someone else is understood as obtaining the lifeblood of someone else for yourself to make you stronger. Therefore, the idea of the vampire stems, some people say, from cannibalism and the concept of putting someone's body inside your own to obtain more life or a stronger life or a better life. As vampires, we know them as creatures that maintain immortality by sucking blood, and they're mostly night creatures. Well, this is another myth because some of them in some works of literature, including my book, Vampire Resurrection, they can come out actually before it turns dark, in the late afternoon, as long as they're not in the light of the sun. According to the legends, that of course, if they are confronted with sunlight, they're turned to stone or sometimes dust. A lot of them do wear the black capes and have long corpse-like bodies and can fly. Those are all pretty much images that have been, and along with the garlic, that have been, just kind of added to in the ensuing years. Of course, as I said, well, the idea of the vampire we're very familiar with because of Bram Stoker's book, but actually it does go back earlier, and one of the main peoples that had perpetuated this myth was the Slavic people, including most Eastern Europeans from Russia to Bulgaria, Serbia to Poland. They have very rich vampire folklore and legends in the world. And the Slavs had come from the north of the Black Sea and were very closely associated with the Iranians. And prior to the 8th century A.D., they migrated north and are located where they are now. And through the 9th and 10th centuries, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Church were struggling with each other for supremacy, and they formally broke in 1054 A.D. with the Bulgarians and the Russians staying Orthodox while the Poles and the Czechs and the Croatians went Roman. And actually this split caused a big difference in the development of vampire lore, because the Roman Church believed incorrupt bodies were saints, while the Orthodox Church believed they were vampires. So there's sort of a little bit of religion in here as well. The origin of the Slavic vampire actually developed during the 9th century as a result of conflict between pre-Christian paganism and Christianity, and of course Christianity won out with the vampires and other beliefs surviving in folklore. Now, there is a great difference in terms of folk vampires and literary vampires, and I'm just wondering if anyone out there might have any interest or any more knowledge in this area. So if you do, please give us a call. As I was saying about the interest in folk vampires, these creatures are a little bit different than the ones that we have been exposed to on television or in the novels of Anne Rice or the Twilight series. The folk vampire is actually a creature who preceded that literary and commercial vampire, and he's much simpler, cruder, and very much less appealing than his citified cousin. Therefore, folk vampires are very seldom cunning or sexy or romantic. Most of them are just plain old thirsty and not always particular about their sources of nutrition. Such vampires, rural vampires, have been accused of rising from their graves to even filch the blood of cows or any other livestock. So they're not particular with their source. Unlike the more elegant Count Dracula, these entities are foul-smelling and gross, as might be expected from those who are partially decomposed, spending much of their time in a moldy grave. Another common feature of folk vampires is that they're rarely ever seen at work. Most of them are out at night, and the corpse might even exhibit flecks of blood on its face, especially around the lips, and also reeks terribly versus the literary vampire.
Carlotta, do you want to take a quick break?
Yeah, that would be great.
Get us a drink of water here and get set for more. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, back on the Jack Evans Show with Carlotta Holton just after this.
Uniontown Toyota's annual summer sales event is going on now, and the deals are heating up. All new 2010 Toyotas qualify, including the totally redesigned 2010 Prius, which gets 55 mpg combined city and highway. If you have an older vehicle that qualifies for the federal Cash for Clunkers program, now is the time to dump it. College grads get an additional $1,000 on all Yaris, Corolla, Camry, Matrix, Tacoma, and RAV4. Trade-ins are Top Book Plus. Get factory cash back, $500 to $2,000, or interest rates as low as 2.9% for 60 months. Want great fuel economy? How about the 35 mpg Yaris for only $12,398 or one?
Welcome back to the Jack Evans Show. Now back to our special guest author from Western New Jersey here, Carlotta Holton.
Yes, thank you. I thought that rather than continuing with all the information about the vampires, I might continue reading from my book, Vampire Resurrection, to give you a little bit more of an idea of how the old vampire operates in action. Come on, Joe, tell us one of those rip-roaring, blood-curdling stories of yours. For the past 3 years, Joe Long, Vic Tyler, Chet Jenkins, and Don Sullivan, employees of a large pharmaceutical company in Virginia, had been going on an annual camping trip. They hunted, fished, and lolled away their days in the woods. At night, per their tradition, they told stories and drank beer in front of a campfire, regardless of the weather. Mindful of their unique personalities, which didn't always mix well, they enjoyed this ritual almost as a brotherhood of sorts. Their camp was situated in an empty field surrounded by the forest of pine trees. Joe silently thought of this party as a microcosm of the human race adrift in this sea of nature. He dared not voice his feelings so as not to risk further ridicule. He knew he was the poet of the group, and usually he didn't mind it, but to go too deep with his buddies seemed vain. So he closed his eyes and breathed in the pure air, appreciating the fact that he could partake of this experience. His communion with nature was cut short. "Yeah, Chet's right, Joe," Vic said. "Every year we come camping, you come up with a real whopper based on the local color of the area. Come on, tell us a story." "Yeah, night's here, and the fire's going good, so it's a perfect time for one of your stories," added Don. After some good-natured taunting from the others, Joe began. "Guys, we are sitting on top of one of the biggest mysteries in colonial America. This is the site of the famous Lost Colony." "Oh, yeah, I think I read about that in high school," Chet said. "No doubt. It's a pretty famous tale. Evidently, Queen Elizabeth, who was having a thing with Sir Walter Raleigh back in merry old England, agreed to finance his expedition to the New World. After depositing a few men on Roanoke Island in Virginia, right about where we are now, he left and never returned." "Wait a second. You said Virginia. We're in North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken." "Right, you are. But back then, and for 100 years or more, the boundary said this part of the land was Virginia. And the name Virginia was given to the land in North America where Raleigh planned the colony because it was in honor of the Queen of England." "Well, la-dee-da," Don raised his beer bottle, saluting the royal connection. "When you got money, you can have whatever you want, whenever and wherever you want." The men all chuckled. "The region was interesting geographically speaking," Joe continued. "You see, Manteo wraps around Shallowbag Bay on the eastern side of Roanoke Island, part of North Carolina's Outer Banks. It's about 12 miles long and 3 miles wide and sits between the mainland and the barrier islands, with Albemarle Sound on its north, Roanoke South on its east, Pamlico Sound on its south, and Croatan South on its east. In 1587, John White was named governor and set sail from England on this second expedition with 100 or so colonists eager to make a new life here. They met all kinds of difficulties. Over the next few minutes, Joe elaborated on the colonists' problems, their lack of food, and the relationship with the local Native American Powhatans, who were not friendly. Joe took a break, washing his dry throat down with the icy beer. The woods surrounding them were silent. Only the occasional crackle and hiss from the campfire broke the stillness of the night. He continued, "Seems the governor was persuaded by the hungry colonists to go back to England to get more supplies and settlers. Only when he returned a year or so later, they were all gone." "What do you mean by gone?" asked Vic. "Vanished. No one really has an answer. There was a tree which was to act as a signpost warning in the event that anything dangerous had befallen them. If the colonists were being attacked by Indians, they were to draw a cross on the bark of the tree. But when White returned, there was no cross and no people either. The only remnant of the colonists' occupation of the site was a single word, Croatan, inscribed on the tree." "Well, are there any clues as to what happened to them?" "Not really. Only speculation, and historians have been debating over their whereabouts for centuries. The most prevalent thought is that the Indians rebelled and killed them all. But there are lots of unanswered questions. For example, where were their bones? How come White's party found all their chests filled with their belongings buried in the sand? If they were being attacked, how would they have had time to bury their chests? And wouldn't the Indians have taken the goods?" "So what do you think, Joe?" said Chet. "Well, there is another theory, that they were so hungry that some of them left to live with friendlier Indians, either the Hatteras Indians or some other Algonquin people further from here, and eventually they intermarried with them. Some say the colonists set sail in a tiny boat to find somewhere else to grow food, but their craft capsized and drowned at sea." "That's not very exciting, Joe," prodded Don. "I'm sure you've got your own theory, don't you?" Sheepishly grinning, Joe confessed, "I do." "And we can hardly wait to hear it," scoffed Don. "Ignore him. He's soused anyway," suggested Vic. "So, what's your spin?" "I just happen to know that according to an old Indian legend, there was a powerful evil spirit that roamed these caves and woods. He was here long before the English settlers ever set foot on the island. In their dances, they attempted to beseech benevolent spirits to thwart and avenge this fiend. It was really frightening. It had horns and fed on human blood." "An Indian monster. Neat," Don said. "Not exactly, but a creature of evil that went around demanding sacrifices of his victims. He also drank, he was known as the Dark One, or Jumlin, and he drank human blood." Vic ended the noise by continuing to say he couldn't finish any more of the story. The still evening was pierced suddenly with the shrill howling of a wolf. An inexplicable sharp blast of wind fanned the campfire, sending sparks flying up into the night air. "Think there's a storm brewing?" Chet asked. "Nah, just a little wind." "It's the Dark One!" cried Don. Vic jumped and Don laughed like a hyena. "Shut up already," growled Joe. "Why do you like to mess things up?" Don stood up in his sleeping bag and nearly tripped. Unzipping the bag, he fumbled his way toward Joe. Face to face, he stared his co-worker and friend in the eye and in defiance let go of one humongous belch. "You're drunk. Again. Go sleep it off." "I think instead I need to use the latrine." "Do you mind? Takes a real man to hack it out here in the woods, Vic, especially with the Dark One watching. Ha!" The others remained silent, and Don plodded his way into the privacy of the woods. As he staggered, he nearly tripped over a large fallen branch. "Damn it," he grumbled. It took place so long ago, he wondered if anything like that could possibly happen again. I think we'll leave off for there now and take a break.
You're listening to The Jack Evans Show with special guest host Carlotta G. Holton here on your local station, 590 AM WMBS, and she'll be back for the 6 o'clock hour as well to either pick up there where she left off with her story and give us more information about those dark tales from around the campfire. Summertime is fun time, but sometimes summer fun brings the itch of poison ivy and poison oak. Time to see your hometown friends at New Salem and Fairchance Pharmacy for Poison Ivy soap to stop the itch and safe enough to be used on the smallest child. New Salem and Fairchance Pharmacies are your trusted prescription experts. They accept all insurances and bill your insurance company. Have questions about Medicare D? The staff at Fairchance and New Salem Pharmacy will answer your questions, help you fill out the forms, and they are PACE experts. Don't have insurance? Get low prices, plus a senior discount every day. Both stores are well stocked with summer decorative items and thoughtful remembrances for special occasions, including
His death was more important than the act of violence itself. When he thought he could bear no more, when black dots filled his vision, the hands wrung even tighter. As Don swooned, he felt long, pointed fingernails slide down his neck, scratching his flesh. As he yielded to the attacker, he was aware of being caught in arms that were strapping enough to support him. A hot, burning sensation followed the piercing of his neck as darkness enveloped him. The blood was sucked ever so slowly and silently from Don's body. As the assailant savored the warm fluid from his prey, he intermittently stopped and gloated in the thrill of the experience. He always luxuriated in the feeding. He felt no rush or compulsion to dine and run. Instead, the brute ran his tongue over his smooth white teeth and permitted himself the time to sneer at this man who had moments before snickered at the Dark One. For as much as this night creature killed for survival, he also reveled in the agony he inflicted on his victims. The suffering of the victim brought heightened ecstasy, particularly on this first kill after his long-awaited awakening. Although it had been centuries since he had last fed, the instinct which drove him to this nocturnal lust had not failed him. The whole process was accomplished in less than 10 minutes. There was no time to hide the body, and there was no need. After dropping the limp corpse onto the ground, he motioned for his newly made servant to lead them home, back to his resting place in the well-hidden cave. Don's 3 friends were fast asleep in their sleeping bags. A hearty day of fishing, the alcohol, and the cool night air had coaxed them into a deep and relaxed sleep. No one worried about Don. They had rationalized, based on their past experiences with him, that he had passed out and was resting beneath a tree and would more than likely turn up the next morning. When the night air of Manteo carried the shrill cry of a lone wolf, none of Don's friends had awakened. It was to be Don's final tribute.
Ooh. Very nice.
Thank you.
So this is from your book, Vampire Resurrection?
That's correct.
Okay. I presume the emotionless teenager was the one we met in your first excerpt.
That could be.
Could be. That'd just be what I would be thinking. So, how can I pick that up? How can our listeners pick up Vampire Resurrection, or maybe any of your other works?
Okay. Yes, my other works include Touching the Dead, which is a collection of short stories based on ethnic superstitions, and Salem Pact, which is about the Salem witchcraft trials, and of course, as you said, Vampire Resurrection. They're all available at local bookstores, and they can also be purchased through my publisher, which is Sterling House Publisher, and they're located right in Pittsburgh. And you can also get more information on my website, which is www.holtonhorrorandmore.com. And I'd love to hear from different readers and people who are interested in the subject, so they can also contact me. My email is Salem, S-A-L-E-M, Pact, P-A-C-T, at Comcast.net.
Okay, so HoltonHorrorAndMore.com.
Right.
Or you can email you at SalemPact@Comcast.net.
That's correct.
Fantastic. How did you get inspired to write about this particular topic?
Well, I'm always intrigued with the mysteries from our history. And when I was Salem Pact, I was very interested. I had a lot of experience going up to Salem, and I had done a master's thesis actually on Hawthorne, whose great-great-uncle was one of the hanging judges at Salem. And with Vampire Resurrection, I was always intrigued with what really happened to those lost colonists of Roanoke. And as I indicated in part of the excerpt that I read, there are several theories, but no one really knows for certain what happened to them. And as I got thinking about it, I thought, well, what's to say a Native American Indian vampire wasn't responsible, or one of his kin that he had made? So that's pretty much where I got the idea. I kind of start with a historical mystery and then give my own spin to what possibly could have caused it.
Okay, so it's more of a historical interest rather than something from other fictional works that was mainly your inspiration.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. I know we're flipping ahead maybe a little bit. Are you working on another project here?
Actually, yes. I have another book that will be coming out in 2010. Excuse me. And that's called Deadly Innocence, and it questions. It's actually kind of a takeoff on a Henry James book, The Turn of the Screw. And we're wondering whether this 8-year-old child is who commits a lot of violent crime, whether she is in fact seeing the ghosts of her dead ancestors, or whether she is just a product of a genetic mutation from a family of murderers, because she's related to Lizzie Borden, and before that, a woman named Rebecca Cornell.
Huh.
So there again we have that historical idea. Is there such a thing as a killer gene?
Right, nature versus nurture, that kind of thing. Right,
yes.
and Lizzie Borden was acquitted.
Yes, she was.
And so I'm like, why is she still infamy? I guess it's kind of like OJ or something today.
Well, I don't think a lot of people really believe that she should have been exonerated, but...
No, there it is. Yeah, Turn of the Screw, also another classic piece of literature. I read that, and there was like a little compendium with Frankenstein and Dracula, and I think The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Right.
I think Turn of the Screw was in there as well, and it was the only one that I really hadn't heard of too much at the time, and I thought that was one of the more interesting stories in that compendium.
I thought it was fascinating when you consider that was the governess really seeing the ghosts that the children were, possessed by, or was she really slightly...
Psychotic.
Yes.
Yes.
And interesting because, of course, Henry James's brother was the famous psychologist William James, who wrote all about feminine and female sexual frustration. So adds another spin to it.
All right. How did you get into this in the first place? Not so much the writing, but what's even your background? Are you like a author by trade?
Actually, I was a journalist for many, many years. I had written. I was a staff news reporter for the Daily Journal, which is unfortunately now defunct. I wrote for the New York Times, and I was an editor and a travel writer for the Bergen Record. So I have a very long journalistic background. But the thing is, when you write for a newspaper or a magazine, everything has to be fact-checked and factual, and it doesn't leave too much room for flights of fancy. So I always wanted to write novels and fiction, but of course that doesn't pay the bills necessarily.
Not most of the time, unless your name is like Danielle Steele or Michael Crichton, the late Michael Crichton, Tom Clancy, a lot of these writers whose names you hear all the time. Hey, we do have a caller on the line. Rebecca from Pittsburgh has a question for you. If we can bring her on the line. And Rebecca, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you? I'm breaking up. I'm on a cell phone, and I'm just caught part of the program, and I was wondering how I could get your book.
Oh, okay.
She must have just tuned in.
We were just talking about that. Well, it's available at most bookstores, or you can also go online to Sterling House Publisher, and you can also go to my website, and there's information there on ordering it. And my website is Holton, Holton, T-O-N, horrorandmore.com.
Okay. Could you repeat that again, please? I didn't catch it all.
It's Holton, H-O-L-T-O-N, horror, H-O-R-R-O-R, and more.com.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. Your books sound great.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Looking forward. Okay. Bye-bye.
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 And if anybody else out there has any questions for our guest host today, Carlotta Holton, the number is 724-438-4593 or 1-866-590-WMBS. And it does look like we've got somebody else calling in here, so let's bring them on the line. Caller, you're on the air with Carlotta Holton.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hello.
Who's this?
How are you, Carlotta?
I'm fine.
Oh, that's good. I live in Uniontown, and I write. I'm a bit of a historian and a collector of precious old junk.
Okay.
And I wondered, have you ever written about a haunted church?
No, not a haunted church, no. Is there one that you're familiar with?
There is one in this area, and I wondered, do you travel to this area?
On occasion. I actually last year did a taping on Midnight Monster Hop at Castle Blood.
Okay. The reason I wanted to ask you is because this church is worth investigating, and I almost hate to talk about it on the radio because there's always people who exploit.
Right.
You know, I think that you're an ethical individual. It's also a church I'd really like to see preserved, and when you see it, you'll be very taken, I think, by just the look of it. It's a vernacular building from the 1830s, which in our area, you know, this area is always a little behind the times. It looks more like the very early 1800s or even late 1700s. It's in Rostraver Township at what's known as Fellsburg.
Okay.
It's the Fells Methodist Church.
Okay.
And it's been abandoned by the church, and it was given to the township that maintained it as a library for many years. And unfortunately, now the township just uses part of it for offices, and the original structure's starting to fall into disrepair. But I stopped into the offices the other day that were in the modern addition built in the 1950s, and the workers there, and these are EMS workers, talked about ghosts.
How interesting.
They talked about their offices being mixed up and upset. They talked about orbs of light.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in the addition built in the 1950s. And they had parts of books Xeroxed, you know, that told the story of this Fells Church and the various sightings that had been in there. But these were very rational people, you know, and this is all they talked about was how haunted the building was.
Well, I've not heard of a haunted church. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's not in the early part, the early structure. It's in the modern addition. And in the 50s, the church, I think the 60s, unfortunately, you know, and like a lot of churches, the congregation became wealthy and they wanted to move it, but, you know, they moved to a different location, and I don't know why they abandoned the old church. Of interest is, in the basement is a spring. Like a lot of old buildings were built for convenience sake before the days of pumped water, you know, with the spring in the basement. But I got to digging, and this Benjamin Fell is a Revolutionary War hero, the guy who founded it. And are you much interested in that story?
Well, that's very interesting. I'll tell you, I don't know how much time we have, but I will give you my email address if you'd like to tell me more about that. Do you have email?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, my email is...
Hold on,
sure.
I'll get a pen, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's Salem, S-A-L-E-M, Pact, P-A-C-T, all one word, at Comcast.
Salem, P-A-C-T?
C as
I can hardly hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. How far did you get? Salem, S-A-L-E-M.
Yes.
Pact, P as in Paul, A-C-T.
Okay.
At Comcast.net.
Okay. Go ahead. That's it.
That's it. It's all one word.
Yeah.
SalemPact at Comcast.net. That's my email address. So if you care to email me some more of that information, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, this Benjamin Fell was a Quaker, and he had a tannery near Valley Forge. And during the Revolution, the soldiers were coming in begging for food and a place to stay. And, of course, you know, it was said of Washington's army, you could track the army through the snow by the blood from their feet. He put them to work making shoes. And because he aided the soldiers, the Quakers expelled him from the church. So he came west after the war and was rewarded with a tract of land and essentially built the first business in Monongahela, PA, which was a tannery. And it says on his grave, a friend of Washington. During the Whiskey Rebellion, he then housed soldiers there because of his support for the government. And even though Monongahela was, you know, one of the centers of the Whiskey Rebellion, similar to Shays' Rebellion up your way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Shays came in the 1780s. This was in the 1790s.
Well, he was certainly involved. He was really entrenched in history with a lot of significant events.
Well, better than that, I at auction down that way bought an old ledger, which turns out to be the ledger from his tannery. And it has a notation in there in September 1794, bought 20 gallons of whiskey. And throughout the ledger, it runs from about 1786 to 1801. There's no other notation like that. Now and then he buys a flask of brandy. But he was housing the army in September 1794, which is how I identified the ledger as being Benjamin Fell. And interestingly enough, Adlai Stevenson is descended from him. So I did a little bit of research there about the church, and I'm very interested in it being preserved. A lot of the names in the old ledger were in the graveyard there. And, you know, when I was trying to figure out whose ledger it was, I remembered seeing names there like Basil and P-E-A-C, Peace, that, you know, corresponded to names that were in that cemetery. So I went back and looked around and became convinced that that was indeed the, you know, the tannery.
Mm-hmm. Back to the church, I was just curious. Is there any kind of speculation as to who the spirits might be?
Well, I thought that's why you'd be interested in it. And
okay.
And one very interesting thing about Fell, his bones, by legend, were not buried in the grave. They were buried in the basement of the church because they thought that Native Americans might dig them up, not that they were hostile, but for the spiritual power of the bones. He was a founder of the Methodist Church in this area, and he was visited quite a bit by Francis Asbury, and Asbury makes long mentions of his stays with the Fells in his writings, in Asbury's journals. So, you know, buying this old ledger just by happenstance sort of brought me into being interested in the church, which I had heard of, but I'm from Uniontown, and, you know, 40 miles away you have a different history.
Hey, caller, we have to take a break here. Can you hang on here for a second?
If you'd like.
Okay.
All right. We'll be right back here on the Jack Evans Show with special guest host Carlotta G. Holton.
If you are in the market for a new dinette, now is the time to save at Chesler's Fine Furniture. Chesler's has an exciting new look in dinettes you won't want to miss. They have tabletops of solid wood, wood veneers, or formica, and finishes to match any kitchen or dining area. Select from elm, pecan, oak, both light and dark, maple, and cherry. The chairs are metal with accents covered in top-grain vinyl or nylon to your liking. Chesler's also has solid wood chairs to match every set. There are over 50 sets to select from for immediate delivery in 3, 5, or 7-piece sizes. Prices have been reduced with 90 days the same as cash. Come into Chesler's today and make your selection with savings from $50 to $350. Choose a 5-piece oak-finished set with metal chairs for $279 or a 5-piece square set with glass top for $279. Chesler's also has a 54-inch square gathering table and 4 stools for $529. Delivery, layaway, and credit terms are available.
Lou Yarbrough, Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company.
I think part of what gives folks kind of the heebie-jeebies when they're talking to an insurance agent is that they think they're going to slide some kind of product in there that they really don't need. But Nationwide has this on-your-side review. You see your agent. He talks about any life changes. Are you having a new kid? Did you get a new job? And actually, the last time I had one, it saved me $100.
Save money and get the right coverage with the on-your-side review, only from Nationwide Insurance.
We're going to help you through it with your best interest in mind, not, hey, I just want to sell you one more gadget.
Get insurance that's easy on your budget with the on-your-side review, only from Nationwide Insurance. Plus, you can save up to $523 when you switch now.
Your local Nationwide agent is on your side with the exact coverage you need at the right price. See Nelson Boscovich, Gene Scrivonic, or Brad Boscovich in Uniontown for a quote today.
Underwritten by Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliated companies, Columbus, Ohio, subject to underwriting guidelines, review, and approval. Products and discounts not available to all persons in all states. 523 annual savings from policy data through July 2007.
And now we return to the Jack Evans Show. About 10 minutes or so left in the show. And our special guest host today, once again, is the author of Vampire Resurrection and other like novels, Carlotta Holton. Okay. So you're finding out some history of this region as well from one of our colleagues.
That's interesting because I am working on Touching the Dead Volume 2. I'm always looking for ghost and spooky stories and, that have some basis in reality.
Okay.
But I wanted to mention something earlier. I had said there are different types of vampires, and there was one that I still hadn't gotten to, so I thought maybe I'd just touch on that a bit.
Absolutely.
The first one we talked about were, of course, the sanguine, the blood-sucking type, and secondly, we talked a little bit about the crude and very rustic folklore-type vampire. But the third kind we have not mentioned, and I'm sure almost all of us have encountered this particular type before, and that's the psychic vampire. And psychic vampire really is a person whose personality trait is such that he just sucks up all the energy out of another person. And I know it sounds very funny, but it's still very true. There are all of us happen to know people that are like that. They can just drain us. We leave them and we're just totally drained, So that is actually another kind of vampire. The other thing I wanted to mention is why do we have such an interest in vampires? And I think there are two reasons. And the first one has to do with it. Of course, it offers the possibility of eternal life. And especially for people who are not so religious, it's sort of a comfort to know that there might be something, that this is not the end. And don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that has a fascination for a lot of people. And the second thing is that I have to mention this, is that especially women are attracted because the vampire is sort of like the bad boy, the girl always falling for the wrong guy. And years ago when Frank Langella, the actor who played Count Dracula both on Broadway and in the film, years ago I had seen him in the Broadway production, and he's coming out during a matinee, and he comes on stage, and there he is all, with the cape up and, looking very eerie and mysterious, and all the women in the audience are screaming, "Bite me, bite me," because they just thought he was so wonderfully handsome and gorgeous. But it was interesting because he had a wonderful quote, which I thought kind of summed up that sexual undertone that is so characteristic of people's interest in the vampire. He says that vampires are sexy to a woman, perhaps because the fantasy is similar to that of the man on the white horse sweeping her off to paradise. So I thought that was an interesting little touch.
Wow. No, I like that too. And Frank Langella, if that still doesn't ring any bells, he was just recently nominated for an Oscar for his work for Frost Nixon.
Yes, correct. That's correct. But he did play, I guess it must have been in the 70s or early 80s that he was in the film. He starred opposite Laurence Olivier.
And Laurence Olivier was Dr. Help me out here.
Mangle, was it?
That doesn't seem to ring the bell, but that could be it.
Okay.
Wasn't that like in the later version of...
Marathon Man? Are you talking about the Marathon Man?
No, I'm talking about the guy that Anthony Hopkins played in the later incarnation of the film. The doctor who goes and stakes him at the end.
Right. Van Helsing.
Van Helsing.
Right.
Is that who Olivier played?
Yes, he did.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah.
That way.
And Langella's himself, he's not any stranger to things creepy. I mean, he later did The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp. I think it was a Roman Polanski film. I didn't really care for it, but it was still delving into things post-afterlife and things. He seemed to really eat that up, so.
Yeah.
Right, good stuff. So once again, got about 5 minutes left. I did want to make sure that you got at least one more chance, probably two, to once again tell people about Vampire Resurrection and how to get it.
Okay, well, Vampire Resurrection is available at most local bookstores, Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And you can also contact Sterling House Publisher in Pittsburgh and get it that way. And get more information about it and all of my other books, including Touching the Dead and Salem Pact, by going to my website at www.holton, that's HOLTON, horrorandmore.com. And as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to hear from people who have read the book or have any interest in the subject. And you can contact me at my email address, which is Salem, that's SALEM, Pact, PACT, at Comcast.net.
All right, and there is a website that I looked at pretty recently where your book got pretty good reviews, I would have to say. A little, slight, small quote reviews from both the regular host of the show, Jack Evans, and Ricky Dick, a.k.a. Gravely Macabre, down the street at Castle Blood.
This is true, and also I'd like to share the fact that Vampire Resurrection has just won a book award from the National Federation of Press Women, and I'll be going down to San Antonio on September 12th to get that award. So I am very pleased with that.
Excellent.
Yes.
We have another caller on the line. I believe we have Bob on the line. And
how you doing?
Yeah, there he is.
How you doing?
Hi, Bob.
I just want to say real quick that back in 1931, which was a different generation at the time, there's a lot of women in this country. More women wrote fan mail to actor Bela Lugosi portraying Dracula than any in the history of time.
I'm not surprised. It'll go with that whole idea of sweeping women off their feet. You know, the dark, mysterious. Although, frankly, I thought Bela Lugosi was a bit creepy and scary, but.
Yeah, Bela Lugosi was born not too far from Transylvania, in the country of Hungary, little town of Lagoj, which the town was named after him. But although sad to say, though, his film career, he had his ups and downs, and ironically, it went downhill. Although he always portrayed a super A1 performance in every movie that he made. He only portrayed Dracula like 3 times on screen. And of course, he was in like vampire-like type of characters and different, not mentioning Dracula, but through copycat reasons and circumstances, like Count Tesla in Return of the Vampire, movies of that nature. But I think, in my opinion, he was a very fine actor. And at that time, in the 1930s and 40s, he did scare a lot of people in the movie theaters.
Oh, I'm sure. He had very mesmerizing eyes, to say the least.
All right, thanks for your call, Bob.
Okay, hey, have a nice evening. Nice talking to you, caller.
You too, Bob.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Bob. He calls in every now and again. He's actually, I think, been a guest of Jack Evans a couple times. He's got a fascination with the old movies and with Bela Lugosi, etc. So
that's interesting.
It's good to hear from him here on a very similar topic.
Yeah.
All right, got about probably 3 minutes left here. What else can we touch on here? talked about your book. You said Touching the Dead, one of your other books that's already available. Now, that is more of a compilation of tales, more than just one straight narrative?
Yes, it is. It's a compilation of short stories, and they're based on ethnic superstitions. As I was telling one of your guests when we were on break, that my father was of Russian and Czechoslovakian descent, and used to tell me wonderful stories. And as I began writing, I kept those stories in my head, and I wondered, there was about different superstitions, and I wondered if other people in other lands and cultures also had such superstitions. And as I mentioned earlier, I did some travel writing for the Bergen Record and was over in Europe a few times. And as I went to different places, I would ask these people, had they any superstitions? And indeed they did. And I thought, wow, this is really neat. There's never really been a book that talks about the superstition, but not just as a listing of superstitions and what they mean, but rather takes the superstition and wraps a short story which kind of exemplifies how psychologically that superstition impacts on people's lives.
Okay. And what about... Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's really what the stories are about, and now I'm working on Volume 2 because it's such an untapped resource. There are just... for example, the evil eye is prevalent in the Italian culture. It's called, in Russian, it's called the overlook. So it's the same superstition, it's just called something different, and it manifests people's lives in a little different way. And then there are also some cultures have different superstitions than other cultures. So it's just it's really an endless resource.
Okay. And that's Touching the Dead. And that's right. It does not currently have Volume 1 on it. It's just straight up Touching the Dead.
Right. So
okay.
Volume 2 will probably be Touching the Dead
Volume
again.
2. Oh, again? Oh, that's cute.
I think so.
I like that. And again, you can find out more information at HoltonHorrorAndMore.com. You can also email Carlotta at SalemPact. That's all one word, SalemPact at Comcast.net. And get more info about Vampire Resurrection, Touching the Dead, Salem Pact, and whatever else you're working on.
Exactly.
Thanks very much for being on the air with us today, Carlotta.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I'm sure Jack will have you back at some point either as guest or guest host, and we look forward to that.
Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, Mike.
Bye-bye.
And that is pretty much the conclusion of the Jack Evans Show for this evening, with our special thanks to special guest Carlotta Holton.